In the popular imagination, a knight in full armor was a walking fortress, untouchable, unstoppable, and immune to danger. But history paints a different picture. On real medieval battlefields, armor was only one layer of survival, and it came with trade-offs. Clever tactics, specialized weapons, the limits of human endurance, and the unpredictable chaos of war all chipped away at the protection that steel could offer. Understanding why armor didn't always save its wearer means looking beyond the gleam of polished plate to the gritty, complex realities of medieval combat. Number 1. Armor wasn't invincible. In popular imagination, medieval armor feels like a nearly magical steel shell, surrounding the knight impenetrable and dependable. But in actual medieval combat, armor was a calculated compromise, and those compromises could turn deadly. A full suit of plate weighed around 50 to 60 pounds. That may sound manageable, but after hours of marching through heat or mud or exertion during battle, fatigue would build. A weary knight moved slower, reacted later, and became more vulnerable. Armor might slow the blow, but could not restore speed or stamina. Armor wasn't a continuous shell. It needed gaps at joints around the armpits, groin, elbows, knees, neck to allow movement. Skilled opponents honed their weapons and techniques to exploit those openings. Weapons like the estocalon, stiff, point-only sword, and polearm spikes were crafted specifically to slip into those gaps and thrust between plates. Even if armor stopped penetration, force could still be deadly. Blunt weapons maces, warhammers, flanged maces didn't need to break the armor. A crushing or concussive blow could dent the steel enough to fracture bones or deliver concussive trauma inside the helmet, effectively neutralizing the knight even if the armor remained intact. Protection came at a price beyond fatigue and mobility. The visibility of armor made its wearer a beacon on the battlefield. Knights were valuable, either for ransom or prestige, so they were prime targets. That attention increased the likelihood of being overwhelmed or singled out, regardless of how strong the armor was. When it came to projectiles, not every arrow was equal, and armor couldn't just stop them all. Broadhead arrow tips encouraged bleeding wounds, but were less effective against metal. Bodkin points' long, narrow, spike-like heads could pierce chainmail or exploit weak armor designs, particularly at close range. Testing has shown that bodkin arrows could split mail and, under enough force, penetrate the padding beneath or even thin plate. But real medieval armor often combined layers, padded gambeson, mail, and plate, and was well crafted to withstand such threats. Results varied, and in many cases, plate stopped bodkins unless they hit a vulnerable area. So even the most robust medieval armor had its Achilles heel. Gaps needed for movement, vulnerability to blunt force, exhaustion, and projectiles designed to exploit these weaknesses meant armor was no absolute guarantee of survival. In the chaos of battle, steel could only do so much. Staying alive required mobility, awareness, tactics, and endurance, not just a shiny suit of armor. Number 2. Tactics could outmatch steel. Medieval commanders learned quickly that you don't beat armor by hitting it harder. You beat it by shaping the fight. Terrain was the first weapon. If you could force armored men into mud, steep ground, or narrow defiles, their advantages shrank. Heavy plate stayed balanced when moving, but it punished you when footing vanished. A few inches of churned soil turned a confident advance into a slow, exhausting trudge. Defensive lines exploited this with ditches, brush, and sharpened stakes that funneled cavalry and disorganized infantry, so even elite knights arrived piecemeal and winded. Missile fire rarely needed to kill outright. Its job was to control tempo. Volley after volley made units raise shields, hunker down, and lose momentum while the rest of the army set the trap. Crossbowmen behind big Pavis shields advanced in pulses, forcing armored enemies to choose between staying put under fire or rushing forward through obstacles where pikes waited. Commanders also played with depth and frontage. A dense block of pikes or bills created a hedgehog that punished frontal attacks, while a shallow line baited overconfident charges, then fell back deliberately to stretch formations and expose flanks. Once a flank bent, armor mattered less than cohesion. Men in steel survived blows. they don't survive encirclement. In many battles, dismounting the nobility was the sober call. On foot, a knight in plate could anchor a line, but he also lost cavalry shock and became vulnerable to methodical pressure push of pike, hook of halberd, trip, and finish. Close-in techniques exploited armor's joints, half-swording to guide a rigid blade into armpit or visor, hooking with polearms to pull someone off balance, and wrestling throws that made weight a liability. Inside the crush, getting knocked prone was almost a death sentence. Standing up in harness while someone pinned your shield or kneeled on your cuisses was nearly impossible. Sieges weaponized gravity and space. From height, even simple stones concentrated enough force to dent helmets and buckle plates. Fire, smoke, and collapsing timber didn't care how good your cuirass was. Meanwhile, starvation and sleeplessness did steady damage armor couldn't absorb. A garrison that rationed water and rotated watches outlasted a gleaming assault that burned stamina too early. Strategy was also economic. Ransom culture made conspicuous armor a magnet for capture attempts, so formations aimed to isolate high-status targets rather than kill them, which in turn distorted how those targets could maneuver. In short, tactics reframed combat from a duel of metallurgy to a contest of choices, control ground, pace, angles, and morale. And the best steel became heavy, hot, and sometimes fatally slow. Number 3. Weapons evolved to beat armor. The story of the Middle Ages is not plate winning or weapons winning, but each side forcing the other to adapt, and the details of those adaptations explain why armor never made anyone untouchable. Early on, mail and simple helmets handled slashing swords well, so fighters shifted toward concentrated force and tight points. Flanged maces that focused impact along ridges, warhammers with beaks that bit into metal, and Pollux's versatile staffs with axe, hammer, and spike built for armored dueling. As plates spread and hardened, smiths fluted surfaces to stiffen them without huge weight gains, but soldiers answered by narrowing blades and stiffening spines. The estuck and reinforced arming swords excelled at half-swording, grip the blade with the offhand, steer the tip like a pry bar, and drive into the armpit, visor, or behind the knee. When space closed, a rondelle dagger or misericord finished the job through a seam rather than through a plate. At reach, polearms multiplied. The halberd's axe chopped, the rear hook yanked, and the top spike thrust. The bec de corbin specialized further, delivering punchy, crow's beak blows that dented or cracked plates, then used hooks to pull riders down where weight turned against them. Ranged weapons followed the same logic. Less slicing, more pressure. Crossbows grew heavier, with steel prods and mechanical windlasses or cranaquins, sending dense quarrels that hit small areas very hard, especially at short distances where velocity and bolt mass mattered most. Longbowmen trained to draw extreme weights didn't need to pierce the strongest plate dead center to matter. They disrupted movement, punished gaps, and forced heads down so infantry with bills and pikes could close. Battlefield systems reinforced the hardware. Dense pike blocks and billmen formed bristling fronts that blunted noble charges and held knights in place while hooks and spikes did surgical work. When two armored fighters met one-on-one, technique turned swords into tools. Mordhau strikes used the hilt like a hammer. Wrestling throws and trips exploited high center of mass. Leverage, not edge, decided outcomes. Firearms changed the calculus again. Handgunners and early arquebuses made even excellent harness a risk at close range, pushing armorers to proof breastplates against shot with extra thickness over the heart, while leaving other areas thinner to control weight. That worked for a while, but it raised costs and still didn't solve the blast of smoke, shock, and penetration at near distances. By the late 15th and early 16th centuries, many cavalrymen adopted three-quarter suits and more flexible gear, accepting that speed, formation discipline, and coordinated fire and pike would do more to keep them alive than another few millimeters of steel. In every phase, the winning move wasn't to swing harder at the broadest plate. It was to focus force, control position, and attack where metal had to give way to human movement. Number 4. The human factor. Even the finest harness couldn't rewrite biology, and that's why so many well-equipped fighters still failed under pressure. Heat was the first enemy. A closed helmet trapped warmth and moisture, so within minutes, sweat streamed, vision blurred, and every breath felt thicker. Eye slits narrowed the world to a letterbox, peripheral cues that keep you safe. Someone circling left, a spear angling low. Arrived late or not at all. Hearing dulled under steel and padding, which meant shouted orders, drum signals, or a warning from a friend could vanish in the general roar. Armor moved with the body, but never as freely as bare limbs. Once heart rate spiked and legs filled with lactic burn, footwork slowed, and slow feet lose fights. Knights trained hard riding with a lance, half-swording, grappling in gear, but campaigns added what the training hall couldn't. Broken sleep, bad rations, wet clothes that rubbed skin raw, and marches that drained reserves before weapons even crossed. Thirst and lost salts made hands clumsy. Fine motor control dipped, so fastening a strap, clearing a jammed visor, or switching grips under stress took longer than you think. Padding soaked by rain, or river crossings gained weight and chafed. Mud clung to sabatons. A slipped step sent you to a knee, and standing back up while someone pressed a shield edge into your breastplate was its own battle. Horses multiplied both risk and reach. A spooked mount sidestepped into pikes. A stumble threw a rider, and a fall under hooves trapped a man whose friends could not always drag him free quickly enough. Cognitive strain mattered as much as muscle. Adrenaline sharpened for a moment, then crashed, leaving tremor and tunnel vision. Decision quality slid just when formations needed steady judgment. Hold, pivot, or pull back. Morale rippled through lines like weather. A rumor of flanking cavalry, or a banner tipping the wrong way, could make disciplined men crowd together, jam their own weapons, and trip each other. Health outside the fight was unforgiving. A shallow cut turned dangerous when dirt and sweat entered, and without reliable antisepsis, infection stole weeks or lives. Smoke from fires and dust from thousands of feet choked lungs. Coughing fits inside a visor were not just miserable. They interrupted rhythm and timing. Logistics added quiet pressure. Dull edges from overuse, stretched straps, dented plates that pinched a tendon each time you bent. None of this meant armor was useless. It meant steel could not compensate for dehydration, fatigue, fear, confusion, and the randomness of moving animals and crowds. Survival in that world depended on conditioning, unit discipline, and luck at least as much as metallurgy. And on the worst days, the body not the breastplate set the limit.